good to see you. It's only been like 10 years, I guess, but we did
Yeah,
chat a few months ago, but it's great to see you.
you too. Yeah, thanks for having me. I think this is a really cool concept, and I think you guys are hitting on a really interesting point of like entrepreneurs that are a little bit scared to take the leap or are kind of in that very messy early stage of entrepreneurship, as
Yes.
opposed to the entrepreneur that had success and sold their company for $100 million and
Yes.
is on the
Yeah.
back end of it. Like you guys are kind of getting at that point that I think a lot of people are interested in, but don't even know what that first step into entrepreneurship looks like. So while I feel somewhat unqualified to like be on a podcast about it, I am out here doing the entrepreneurship thing. So hopefully it's helpful.
I can definitely appreciate you. The mindset of feeling like you're not qualified is kind of exactly what we're going for. It is the entire theme of it. So that's perfect.
Yeah, I think it's good
Awesome.
that you said that because I think everyone feels that way where you're just like, or maybe I shouldn't say everyone. I think people I like feel that way. The people who always feel qualified, I think they're a little annoying. It's like, I think it's a little more relatable. So, yes, very excited to chat. So I know we met at training for Bank of America, and I knew you were working in Texas, but I guess where did you grow up? What undergrad did you go to, and some background would be helpful for I think setting the scene.
Yeah, totally. So born and raised outside of Baltimore, in Maryland. My whole family is still there. Went to undergrad at the University of South Carolina. So wanted to go towards warmer weather and a big football school.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to get an academic scholarship there. So kind of like all of that buttoned up made it the perfect spot for me to head. When I was there, I studied international business, finance, and real estate, and I had a minor in Spanish. So
You
was
covered everything.
learning a bunch of different things, touching a bunch of different things, wasn't
Hola.
totally sure
Yeah.
what it is I wanted to do. South Carolina has an amazing international business program. So that was part of why I took that, I was interested in maybe like going abroad. But I ended up meeting my now husband when I was in undergrad, and he is a Texan. So that's a little bit about how I took the path to Texas. The jobs that I was looking at right out of undergrad were either in consulting, actually, which is interesting because that's kind of where I ended up after business school. But in consulting or finance, and ultimately, I thought finance would be a great place to start my career, and there was a job opportunity for me in Dallas. So that's where I went after undergrad. Moved to Dallas. I lived in Dallas for about 4 years, working at Bank of America with you, Stephen.
Yes.
I was in the asset-based lending group there, and
Okay.
I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of why I thought that was a great spot to start my career. But ended up doing a lot of bankruptcy work, and that was strategic in a sense, but made me realize that I'd really like to be in a position of helping companies grow, and kind of companies more in that like growth stage versus trying to figure out if they had the liquidity to exit bankruptcy or the liquidity to make it for another 6 weeks. And so that's how I decided that I wanted to take a pivot in my career. Decided to apply to business school, ended up going to Kellogg in Chicago, and then I joined Bain, and I spent that summer, it was a 2-year program, so I spent my summer internship at Bain, and then I joined them full time, and I was there for about 2.5 years before I took the jump to start Spacers. So I now live in West Texas, which is a place that I never expected to be living. I'm in Midland, Texas. I can talk a little bit about how I ended up here too. But yeah, that's a little bit of the path and the journey.
Yes. No, that is helpful. So I guess I'm trying to think about it. So you were doing asset-based lending. So you were doing like oil and gas companies, right? Right after undergrad.
So it wasn't E&P, but we did have a lot of companies that were in oil field services.
Yes.
So they're a little bit different. I would say with oil field services, when oil prices drop, OFS companies are the first ones to get hit. And so they get really squeezed on pricing. And so that's why we ended up doing a fair amount of bankruptcy work when there was a downturn. What year was that? Like 2016, 2017.
Yes.
So that's why I ended up doing bankruptcy work a lot. But in asset-based lending, I mean, we were financing all different kinds of companies that were asset heavy. So anything from cowboy boots to trucking We had them in our portfolio of clients. And I think that was actually really interesting because you got to have a peek into how these different companies operate, what their financial health looks like. And you got exposure to a bunch of different industries, which for me was really interesting and also helped me realize that I had a love for consumer and retail because I could read the financial documents on our cowboy boots company all day long to understand like what trends were influencing whether or not consumers wanted to purchase the product. It was when I got into trucking and stuff that I was like, okay, this is where it feels like a job. It's not something that I'm necessarily enjoying, like your eyes glaze over a little bit. And that's part of work, right? Like that you're not going to love every element of it, but it did help me realize that I really liked consumer and retail. So when I went to Bain, um, I was also interested in private equity, so we can talk a little bit about that. But my work at Bain was mostly focused either on private equity or in consumer and retail.
Gotcha. I mean, that's perfect. It makes me like, that's exactly what I imagine like a Texas banker to be doing, like trucking, cowboy boots, oil and gas. So that really fits like in my what I imagine. But yes, I remember because I was in Calgary, which is like a lot of oil and gas too, and we were starting at the same time. So I just remember there was a lot of bankruptcies and like a lot of restructuring. And I was like, man, this is kind of depressing. Like everyone's just coming because it's going poorly. So I definitely remember that time. But so you were working at the bank and then you went and did your MBA. Were you always planning on doing an MBA, or like what was sort of like the rationale behind going back to school?
I had always been interested in going back and getting my MBA. My dad had gotten it. I think in the finance world, there's a lot of people that have their MBA. Some of the people that I most admired at Bank of America had gotten their MBA. And I had heard really positive things about it. So like any good consultant, I ended up talking to a ton of people that got their MBAs to try and figure out if it was going to be worthwhile. And ultimately, I think to do a full-time MBA program, it makes a lot of sense if what you're looking to do is pivot in your career. And so since I was able to identify like, hey, I've done the finance thing, there are elements here that I really like, but I at the time was thinking maybe I wanted to go into private equity, like a restructuring type of private equity, or consulting. I was like, in order for me to make that leap from commercial banking into like a PE type of world, I'm going to have to get like a good MBA school behind my name. And so that's kind of how I decided to go. I took the GMAT. I wasn't sure what things were going to look like. Ended up, things with the GMAT went well enough that I was like, okay, let's throw my hat in the ring and see what schools I can get into. And then just, I had talked to a bunch of people from Kellogg. I got a really good, just like vibe from the people there that they were wanting to invest in their alums to help them be successful. And it seemed like a really collaborative community. And so when I got into Kellogg, it was like, yep, that's where I'm going. Like, and I had a great experience there.
Yeah, it sounds like you put a lot more thought into your MBA than I did. I was just like, oh, it's like a socially acceptable way to quit my job and not have to. Basically, I should have put more thought into it. But were you considering any other schools? Like, were there like 2 or 3 that you were accepted to and you were debating, or was it always just Kellogg? Like once you got accepted?
You know what? To be honest, Stephen, Kellogg was the only school I got into, and so it made the decision easy. I applied to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and Kellogg. Harvard and Stanford like denied me from the start, so I didn't go anywhere there. I interviewed with Wharton and I interviewed with Kellogg, and the Wharton interview, it wasn't going to be a fit. So they did like group interviews, and it was super cutthroat. And I left the interview like, okay, this is not the right fit for me, and I think they felt the same way when I left. Kellogg, I left the interview and I was like, I would love to grab a drink with the person that just interviewed me. They were fantastic. I have a great feel for this school. And so it kind of ended up just totally working out that where I felt was the best fit, I ended up getting into. And so if I hadn't gotten into Kellogg, I would have probably applied second round to like University of Texas and some of the other great schools out there. But I just wanted to kind of like shoot my shot with those 4 schools first round, and it ended up working out.
Gotcha. So So you went from Maryland to Dallas, and then you went from Dallas to Chicago. How did you find going to Chicago after living in Dallas?
Amazing. Chicago is one of the best cities, in my opinion. It's
Okay, so
clean.
so people always, whenever I talk to someone who's lived in Chicago, they always speak like the most highly of it compared to like any other city I've ever heard. But I'm curious as to why. Like, why does everyone love Chicago so much who lives there?
So I love Chicago because it feels like a big city in the way that New York feels like a big city. It's on the lake, it's beautiful. There are amazing restaurants, but it's more manageable and more affordable than New York.
Yeah.
And it feels a little bit cleaner to me. And the people are nice. It's all Midwesterners. So the people are generally really nice. I love Chicago. If it didn't get so cold in the winter, I would want to live in Chicago full time. But the winters are just too brutal for me, which I feel bad complaining because I know y'all are in Canada. So that's a whole other story. But Chicago's a fantastic city. If you haven't been, it's definitely worth the visit.
Yes. No, I a lot of like cool stuff and cool people come out of Chicago. So like there has to be something to it. And I've heard too, like you said, like you get Midwesterners who move there, but it's like it's kind of like all the really cutthroat ambitious people are in like New York or something. So you get like the friendly ambitious people in Chicago. So yes, what you're saying kind of makes sense. But so you go to Chicago, you're at Kellogg. Was the plan? I know you said you kind of wanted to do retail, you were more interested in it, you were thinking about PE. Was the plan always when you went to Kellogg, you're like, consulting is the only way, like the only reason I'm coming here? Or were you thinking about other stuff? Like what was your thought once you started at Kellogg?
When I applied to business school, the plan was I want to pivot into private equity that focuses on like buying companies out of bankruptcy and restructuring them. That was the plan.
Yes.
Then I got to Kellogg and I had a little bit of a crisis of what do I want to be when I grow up? I have no idea. And recruiting starts very early on campus when you get there. For anything that is standardized. For startups, it's a different story. Startups do a lot more of that just-in-time recruiting. But if you want to do investment banking or consulting, those firms, those firms are on campus like starting in September. So I just started going to all of the different information sessions because all of my classmates were, and I wanted to figure out what the deal was and make sure that I wasn't missing out on any of the opportunities. Investment banking, I had kind of already done some stuff in finance. That was not for me. But I was going to the consulting sessions and the people that I was meeting at all of the firms were great, but the people that I met at Bain in particular were fantastic. And Bain has a division that specifically focuses on private equity. So doing private equity due diligences. And I felt that going through the consulting process and learning that skill set of how to do a case interview was going to be valuable no matter where I ended up, whether or not I ended up doing private equity or doing consulting. I thought, hey, it'll be great for me to learn how to do this interview process. And then I ended up really connecting with the people at Bain. And I felt like if I can do my summer internship at Bain and work in their private equity group, even if I decide, hey, consulting is not for me, I can then use the skills that I learned there for trying to get a job in private equity. So I kind of fell into this trap of everybody's on campus, everybody's thinking about interviewing. Let me just follow it. And then I ended up just really liking the people at Bain and decided to kind of do the private equity group with them that summer after I got an offer. And then they extended a full-time offer, and I had such a good summer experience that I decided to go to Bain full-time. And so I really enjoyed, sorry, I'm getting over a little thing. You guys can edit that out, hopefully.
Yes, exactly.
But ended up joining Bain full-time, and I did half of my work was in the private equity group doing due diligences, and then the other half was retail focused. So doing everything from supply chain to competitive strategy for different retail companies.
Gotcha. And how did you find like the case studies and the interviewing for consulting? Did you enjoy that process, or was it like terrible? Like how did you like that?
I think that it was a great skill set to develop. You have to be willing to put in the time. And I was very fortunate that Kellogg had a great club of people that had done it the year prior that helped kind of the class below to learn how to do a case study interview, because it is different than any other interview I've done previously. Yeah. But I did probably 42 interviews before, like 42 interviews with classmates and with fellow consulting people before my actual interview time came. So, but I think it's great to know, hey, you have a problem. How do you break that problem down into 3 or 4 tangible steps, regardless of whether or not you know much about the subject matter? It kind of develops this great skill set for how do you find where the value is and focus on that. And there's different frameworks that you can apply there. But I think that's a great skill set to have. And it helps you be really focused on what is most important and not getting sidetracked into all of the other things that could seem important. It kind of helps you create a like ruthlessly prioritized list.
Yes. No, I remember when I did my MBA, I wasn't thinking about consulting. And then like, I don't know, once you get in the building of a business school, everyone's talking about it, you kind of get like brainwashed. So anyways, I had applied to BCG and got an interview, and then I was like, had it in a few days, and then someone was like, oh, like, have you been prepping cases? And I was like, what are cases? And then so I didn't even like, then once I started to learn what it was, I was like, oh, I'm absolutely like screwed for this. And I still showed up. I was really debating not showing, but like within a minute, you know, me and the other guy knew like I wasn't getting this job. Like I didn't even know what to begin. So it was a very uncomfortable like hour of my life. But you know, once I learned more after, I was like, oh yeah, this would have been a good skill to learn. But it's yeah, so I definitely did not have 42 prep interviews. It was definitely my bad. But yes.
Well, it's tough too. Like, especially at the MBA level, there's so much prep that goes into those jobs. I think I used to do a lot of interviewing, and sometimes in the undergraduate level, I mean, frequently in the undergraduate level, people had no idea what a case interview was. And you just looked for those people that had the glimmers of brilliance. But there's such a framework to it that, yeah, going in cold at MBA level, I can imagine was slightly terrifying.
Oh yeah, he was just like, "Don't you want to ask me for like some info?" And I was like, "Yes." And then he would like slide across this piece of paper, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is cool." And like, "Don't you want to ask about like where it came?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." So it was, yeah, it was very uncomfortable. But anyways, we got through it. So you got the Bain full-time offer. So it sounds like you were split between the PE group and the consumer group. Is that correct?
Well, they just hire for that incoming class. Okay. And then you state what you're interested in working in. So I had spent my summer in private equity group, really liked it, knew that I was going to want to go back and do PEG at some point when I was at Bain. But I was also interested in consumer and retail. So when I joined them full time, my first case was a consumer and retail case. And I'm trying to remember, I did 2 or 3 consumer retail cases before I went in and did their private equity due diligence group. The private equity due diligence group was great for ramping up on a skill set of being able to tackle problems quickly, being able to create slides. It moves much quicker. So a due diligence lasts 3 weeks versus a typical consumer retail case will last 3 months to 6 months. So, but you're creating like the same level of output in each of them, but you're just tackling them very differently. Like one, your client is the people at the consumer and retail firm, and you're trying to get their input to come up with the solution that you're proposing. There's a lot of working together and collaboration. In a private equity due diligence, it's the PE firm basically wants a thumbs up. Sorry. The PE firm basically wants a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether or not they should be investing in this company. And you're meeting with them once a week. There's not a ton of collaboration. It's, hey, give me the readout. Should we be investing here? And if we are, what do we do in the first 6 months after we acquire this company to add value?
Gotcha. Okay, so you're in the group. And I know you're talking about like you thought you'd want to do like, private equity afterwards, but obviously you ended up starting a company. So when you went to Bain, was it always in the back of your mind that like you might want to start something? At this point, had you kind of given up the idea of wanting to do PE and you wanted to start a business? Or like, I'm just curious, is like when you started to work at Bain full time, because obviously there's the route where you stay at Bain forever, you become partner, it's a very lucrative career, or you could go like, somewhere else doing private equity, which is also very lucrative. Like, was it always in the back of your head that you'd want to start a business, or what were you kind of thinking when you went into it?
Yeah, I think that the desire to create something and bring it to market is something that I've always had as a desire. When I was in business school, I did like several new venture development classes.
Sure.
So that was my first taste of what does it look like to kind of come up with a business idea, create an idea you may want to launch. We didn't end up actually launching it. At the time I was working with a team and we had the idea for kind of a female focused cannabis company, and went through the stages of doing like a bunch of different customer interviews, creating a business plan, figuring out what that model would look like. And I actually think that we were really onto something, but nobody wanted to give up those more lucrative offers at like consulting and investment banking at the time, especially when you're leaving with student debt.
Yeah.
So nobody ended up taking that one full time, but that was my first kind of look into what would entrepreneurship look like. On a personal note, because that ended up playing a big role into why I kind of took the jump. My husband and I got married right before I started business school.
Okay.
And right after we got married, I went up to Chicago and he accepted a job in Midland in West Texas. So we were doing long distance basically ever since we got married. And so when consulting slowed down a little bit, I guess that would have been the start of like September of 23, they gave all of the consultants the opportunity to take a sabbatical. And so I took that opportunity and I moved out to West Texas for the time being with the intention of returning to Bain. And I think being out here and getting to spend like quality time with my husband, I was like, okay, I'm reevaluating what's most important to me in life.
Is you were in Dallas at that point working for Bain?
Yes, I was flying every week between Dallas and Midland.
Gotcha.
And I loved Bain. Like I didn't have the intention of leaving, but once I was out here, we had to have real conversations around like what's most important to us right now is that we're building a life together. Yeah. And either that looks like him giving up his job and moving back to Dallas so that I can try and, continue my career at Bain, or it means me, moving out to Midland. And I had the idea for Spacers vaguely, like I had been doing during my sabbatical, I was exploring the non-alcoholic space a lot, and started to kind of get the idea and started to do some like interesting customer interviews to see if there was a gap in the market for kind of a drink between drinks, which is what Spacers ultimately became. But I started to get that idea. I was getting enough positive feedback. And I had conviction that in my personal life, I needed to be in the same place as John, that I decided, okay, like if I have conviction that I'm leaving Bain, my options then are either to look for a new job or to start my own company. And it became very clear to me, like, I have this idea. This is the perfect chance for me to start my own thing. And I felt confidence, and I continue to feel confidence that with the background that I have, if I wanted to go get a corporate job tomorrow, I could. So I think it was really important to have those years of building out a skill set that's marketable. And I also do like some part-time chief of staff stuff right now just to keep the skill sets fresh. But I was like, this is the perfect time for me to pursue entrepreneurship. So it was kind of like conviction that I was leaving Bain and this idea that I was getting really positive feedback on that made me just decide that it was time to take the leap.
Okay. So it wasn't something where like you hated being a consultant and you were just like, I got to work for myself. This sucks. But it was just like kind of like personal, like you were going to go to Midland and
yeah. Yep. That's kind of how it came about. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so I guess that process, because I imagine, looking back now, there's been some time and stuff, but like, was it, like, were you kind of anxious about resigning, like, actually taking that step, telling your bosses you're leaving to start a business? Like, was that something that you found tough to do, or was it like you had a lot of conviction in the idea? Because I think that is a hurdle for a lot of people, especially when it's like, there is a very clear, kind of safe path at where you're at. So what was that kind of like when it was actually time to like resign and be like, I'm going all in on this idea?
Yeah, it's scary, absolutely, to leave a job that has amazing benefits, that pays you well. I really loved the people that I was working with.
Yeah.
So leaving was really scary. But I knew that I had to be in the same place as my husband. And then the other element was I was looking around at what the path to partner would look like at Bain. And who did I see that was doing life the way that I would want to do life at that level? And there were some people that were doing it well, but I think you'll find this at the partner level in any like super high powered career is there's a lot of people that are workaholics, or they're just wired a little bit differently, and they have extreme success because of that. But I didn't see myself being able to show up for my family and my friends the way that I think I would want to at the partner level.
Yeah.
So that also helped kind of create the conviction for me, where I was like, I want to have more control over my schedule, and I want to know that I'm able to fully invest in the relationships, because I think at the end of the day, that's what is most important in life.
Yes. Yeah, it's a heartwarming message, but I think that's very true to think about that as well. Cause you can think of, I don't know, becoming a millionaire banker or something like that. But then it's like, I don't know. I always think about this, like in Toronto, at least everyone kind of commutes in on the train, and you like look at people on the train, and it's like, it's successful people, but none of them look happy. So like, I try and think of that as well in terms of like, successful, but it doesn't look that fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is a common theme that we hear, though, is look to people 10 years down the road from where you are now. And do you like that? If not, try something different, because that's the path you're going on. So it is interesting just to hear that theme continuously pop up. I am very curious, the market opportunity, how maybe you might have approached it differently having gone to business school versus, say, your average person. Like, I never went to business school, and so some of the tactics that you probably use are much more structured than someone who doesn't have that experience. I'm curious, because, for example, the market opportunity for non-alcoholic beverages is very interesting. I've noticed, like, Lewis Hamilton, who's an F1 racer, launched his own non-alcoholic brand recently. And it's definitely like you're seeing it pop up more and more. I think the stats of like Gen Z, their drinking rates are much lower. So it's a very interesting area. I'm very curious if you would have taken the approach more of like, this is a problem in my personal life and I'm trying to solve it, or if you were more, say, structured and like, I identified this opportunity and now I'm interested in going after it. Because I think for a lot of people not in business school, we would just say, I have this pain point, I want to solve it, versus, I don't know if that's the case for you, but I'm just curious how your experience might have been with identifying that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that it's a combination of both. So I had some health stuff going on that caused me to completely cut out alcohol temporarily. I was going through fertility treatments, and they were encouraging me to fully cut out alcohol. So I did. And then afterwards, I still enjoyed having a margarita and whatnot, but I totally changed the way I was consuming alcohol before. Like, having enjoyed the glory of waking up on a Saturday morning and feeling like I had a lot of mental clarity and feeling no hangover. I was like, okay, I still like to drink, but I like to have, I don't want to be hungover. Like, I don't feel good doing that. And so it was a little bit of a pain point, but then I started looking at, does the market support this, and are consumers feeling the same way? Because we have dry January and sober October that are reaching levels every year that they're surpassing from the prior year. And what you see is that consumers that are taking like a month off of alcohol are changing their behavior as well. And so I looked at that to see kind of the consumer trends. You also see that 94% of people that are buying non-alcoholic options are still drinking alcohol. And so I was looking into these statistics to see like, what does the consumer behavior here actually look like? And so you do have a bunch of, especially Gen Z and younger millennials, that still enjoy alcohol, but they want to have a drink in between of some kind, or they're going to be sober, Monday through Thursday, and then they might have a couple drinks Friday, but they don't want to drink the same way that maybe we did in college, right? Like, so I started to look at like the consumer behavior, and I was looking at your total addressable market. The non-alcoholic beverage space is at like $1.8 billion a year right now. And I was looking at how that's trending, and that's supposed to go up, 7% a year, versus alcohol sales are maybe hitting a 1% increase per year. And so looking at all of the market statistics and the consumer behavior in conjunction with the pain point I was experiencing gave me a lot of conviction that this is a market opportunity worth pursuing. And then I supplemented that with like a consumer survey and about 50 different customer interviews to better understand which demographics would be interested in a product like this. Where would they be looking to purchase it? What's their willingness to pay for it? What circumstances are they looking to drink a product like this in? Is it when they're out at a bar or is it when they're going to a house party? So that we could really get a more informed approach of how do you meet the customer where they are. And so I think long-winded answer of saying, yes, it started with a pain point, but there were a lot of other elements that I took into consideration when building out the business plan.
So one thing I hear you saying is you do a lot of market research. You mentioned case studies in business school. Someone who hasn't gone to business school maybe doesn't really know how to do research beyond opening Google. How did you research and get that data for your customer, sort of identifying those stats, but also like finding people to interview? I'm just, maybe you have some like tips that you could give to people who don't necessarily know where to even get started with that.
Yeah. In terms of sources and publications, it's Googling. And a lot of this is free available resources, especially when it comes to like the consumer and retail side of things. The other thing I would recommend doing is finding leaders within the industry and following them on LinkedIn. A lot of these leaders have commentary. They're posting articles that are relevant, that have some of these key statistics, reading interviews with leaders in the space. All of these are like free available resources that if you're thinking about starting a company, you can get easy access to. So I would recommend doing that. There was another question that you had for me.
Yeah, it was also finding people to interview.
Finding consumers. I started reaching out to friends of friends and asking them if they had anyone they would recommend that I talk to. That only goes so far. Another thing that we have done is like giveaways on social media, and that has been a good way to get survey responses. I think the other thing that we have done is I have a marketing intern that I work with who's actually in college right now. And so she has exposure to a bunch of like, if that's the demographic, for example, that you're targeting, which Spacers is to a degree, she's got access to like the Slack channels and can pump something out. And hey, if you fill this out, we'll send you a t-shirt type thing. So that is another way that I've been able to get some of these customer interviews done.
And this might be a dumb question, but so non-alcoholic beverages, like what would be like the difference or the value prop between drinking like, say Spacers or another non-alcoholic beverage, or just drinking like soda or something? Like, I guess what's sort of like the difference between like the purchasing process, I guess?
Yeah. So the value proposition for Spacers is that we are a functional beverage that helps kind of offset the negative effects that you'll experience from alcohol. So it's made with coconut water. It has a lot of electrolytes in it to drive hydration. We have prebiotic fiber in it, so that helps with your gut. If you think about it, alcohol is an antiseptic solution. So when you drink, you're kind of damaging that good gut health that you have, the good gut bacteria that you maybe get from like drinking your kombucha or taking a probiotic. So we put some inulin fiber in our beverage. And then we have vitamin B12 in there, which helps the body process alcohol as well. So that's the value proposition of Spacers. It's like we're a really flavor forward beverage that'll also help you feel better the next morning. It does come at a little bit of a higher price point than a soda because of the functional benefits.
For sure.
But a lot of people these days aren't wanting to drink soda. So, I mean, you've seen Olipop and Poppy become really popular, but those aren't options that are readily available at bars.
Yeah.
So, the other value proposition is like, it's more tasty than water. It looks cooler than just having a cup of water when you're at the bar.
Yeah.
And the value proposition for like a bar that would carry this product is that they're getting margin on this product and they don't have to have the bartender's time filling a cup of water. They can just hand over this can.
Yeah.
So it's a value proposition for both the consumer and the retailer.
So you don't mix it with alcohol. It's just like you're drinking it like in between alcoholic drinks. Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
That's the point of it. And that's why we chose the name Spacers, as we wanted it to be a little bit intuitive of this is used to help you space out your drinks.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about how we came up with the name of Spacers. But there are a lot of people that want to use it as a mixer. So I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up becoming another use case.
Yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, it's just like kombucha. I like kombucha, and then Steven's just like, how can I use it to drink more?
Yeah.
So you kind of touched on it. So you you wanted to get into this space. The market research supported your hypothesis, and like you're scratching your own itch, but there's also demand for it. So then once you've decided like this is the direction I'm going, obviously you have to come up with the product and the brand and all that. And you went to business school. So like, did you work with a chemist, or like, did you do your own research to like realize it's like, oh, I should do coconut water? So that, and then also like coming up with the brands. So you've got a very cool logo, you've got a very cool name, a cool website, but like, what are those first steps when you're like, this is the area I'm going to, but like, now how do I put a business in this industry?
Thanks. Yeah. Good question. So first I was reading all about the effects that alcohol has on the body, getting really smart on what is alcohol doing to the body and what are things that you can do to help the gut. And actually, for anyone that's interested, I think Andrew Huberman has an amazing podcast that's worth listening to about the effect alcohol has on the body. And so I just kind of became like a consumer of all of this information. And then I used that to better understand what ingredients would be helpful in helping offset this. And I started making like batches of different recipes in my kitchen. And I experimented with coconut water. I experimented with using salt. Salt's like an electrolyte. I was just making a bunch of stuff up in my kitchen. And whenever we would have dinner parties, I would serve it to people. Normally there'd be like a bottle of bourbon open or some bottles of wine. And I'm like, okay, everybody's had enough. Time to try a spacer and give me your feedback. And I ended up getting like good feedback from them. And they're like, you need to make this. We need to be able to serve this. So it started in the kitchen. After that, so sorry about this cough.
No problem.
I looked for a product formulation company to work with. And so that is the chemists that help take you from your kitchen recipe to, hey, we're going to use commercially available ingredients to create a product. And so I called probably 10 different product formulation companies. They all have varying pricing. They all have different business models. Some of them have proprietary flavors that you're required to use if you work with them. There were a bunch of different things that I tried to sort out in terms of who I wanted to use for product formulation. And I ended up using a company that's based in California that focuses on helping startups kind of do that transition from the kitchen recipe to commercially available. And so I sent them my samples and they used that to create a recipe. And we went back 5 different times of them creating something, sending it to me. I would taste it. I would have a party at my house with kind of the same group of people of, hey, taste it. What do you think? Do you like this? Do you not like this? One thing that we found is that not all coconut waters are created equally. Some of them have a really distinct nutty taste, which when mixed with our other stuff was not always the most palatable in flavor. And so that's really what it was like testing, what do we like, what do we not like, sending them the feedback, until this past September when we got a recipe that I felt I was really confident with the way it tasted. I thought it tasted really great, and I was ready to take that recipe to market. So that's kind of what it's like working with a product formulation company. Then you have to find a co-manufacturer, unless you want to become the manufacturer of your own product, which is what I would probably not recommend, because building a manufacturing facility is very capital intensive. And when you're starting out, you're not going to be doing large enough batches to support that. Yeah. Also, it's better to focus, I think, on like the marketing of your product and how you're going to take it to market. So I interviewed again, like 10 different co-manufacturers. They all have different MOQs, so minimum order quantities. And you'll find that also with the suppliers, like when you're buying cherry juice, for example, you have to buy a certain amount. They all have a minimum order quantity. But I was looking to find a co-manufacturer that I could work with that would make the smallest possible production run, so that I could use that as something that I could go to market with, see how consumers perceived the product, and it gave me enough flexibility to, if I wanted to change something about the branding, if I want to change something about the flavor, if I want to change something about the positioning of the product, I'm able to do that without having 50,000 cans of product on my hand.
Yeah.
So I have a co-manufacturer that I've been working with. We do not have the product yet. We actually were supposed to do a production run this week. And when they were scaling up the recipe, they found out like, hey, you can't add all of the fiber at once. And so the solution ended up becoming really cloudy. And so now we've been pushed back a month. They're going to order all the ingredients again. We're going to make it again next month. So that's just part of entrepreneurship, is hitting a little bit of a bump in the road. Things don't always go as planned. But next month we should have a full production run. So we'll have the 3,300 cans, and I will work on bringing those to market.
Great. So when you come up with the formula and the drink, and it sounds like I guess, how did you come up with the name? What made you choose the direction for kind of like the branding? Did you work with an agency? Was this all yourself? What was that like?
So I came up with the name pretty immediately. Once I had identified the gap in the market, the gap in the market that I was wanting to fill. And I looked, and there's an educational component anytime you're bringing a product to market that doesn't already exist. And so it needed to be a name that was intuitive and made sense for the use case of the product. And so we came up with the idea. Then we wanted to trademark the name. There was a name in the USPTO that was for spacers, and it was expiring 1 week from when we were looking to file. And so we actually got really lucky that their trademark expired. They had held the trademark for the name. They had never created a product. Sometimes you have people that do that just will like trademark a bunch of names, and then they don't actually use it, but they kind of hold it. And so we really lucked out that they held the product name, let it expire.
Yeah.
We filed the trademark immediately. And so we now, it's not finalized, but we've been conditionally approved for the trademark for the name. So that was kind of the naming of the product. The branding, we knew that we were targeting a Gen Z consumer. Gen Z kind of likes the retro space, the bright, vibrant colors. And so we used that information to create a creative brief. And then we worked with a designer to create all of the branding and the logos for spacers. I did want to lean into the spacers, that like the space theme. And so we have this cute little astronaut that we use in a lot of our branding. I think it's helpful also when you have that type of a visual that people can associate with your product.
Yes. And so was that like a marketing agency that you went to, or was that just like a freelance designer? What was that?
It was a freelance designer that we worked with. Yep.
Okay. No, that's cool.
Yeah, I thought you've got some really cool merch on there. Yeah, really. It was definitely cool to see. I'm really interested in how you're thinking about marketing, because I feel like there's been so much, I guess you could say, chaos in how people launch businesses nowadays with social media and a lot of algorithm driven marketing. A lot of the traditional marketing of just buying ads doesn't necessarily pay off in conversions. And I'm curious, so it's like a two-part question. How do you see like merch, for example, playing a role into a product that's not necessarily a fashion brand, in one way? And then the other side would be, what sort of techniques are you using in this environment to sort of promote your new business?
Mm-hmm. Both great questions. In terms of merchandise, I think of that as being a marketing tool that you can use. If you have people that are passionate about your product and they're rocking the merchandise, then people start asking questions like, hey, what is that brand? It kind of encourages them to maybe look it up. I actually have like the Spacers sweatshirt on right now. It's super comfy, but I think that merchandise can be helpful, like supplemental way to get awareness for your brand. I think Poppy has done a fantastic job of it. I mean, you see their product in Target right now, which is kind of crazy to have a soda brand that now carries merchandise in Target. So they've done it flawlessly, and that's something that we're trying to take some lessons that they've learned and use it for Spacers. In terms of marketing techniques that we're also looking to apply, I think you're spot on that advertising has gotten extremely expensive and doesn't always have the ROI. We have invested in building out a community on TikTok. That is where like my marketing intern has been helping me with that. And then we are launching our Instagram. I think of TikTok as a great way of building awareness. And then with TikTok Shop, it's also a good way to convert the consumer. Instagram, I think of as being your landing page. So if people are interested in the product, they can go there to learn more. It's not maybe the best conversion, but you have to have an Instagram presence, and a lot of cross posting can occur between TikTok and Instagram. There's other things that we're also focused on in terms of like SEO and optimizing our website for SEO. There's things you can do around email automation. We use Shopify for our website right now. And so getting the email automation is something that we're working on there. And then I think as you continue to progress, you kind of think of it as the marketing funnel that starts with awareness. Ultimately, you get the conversion, and then you look for customer loyalty. And I think there are some interesting things on the market right now that are looking to gamify the consumer loyalty process. So we just did a demo with this company, Try Your Best, where consumers can kind of like win points towards spending at your company by posting about your brand or by doing different competitions. And that's something that as we continue to scale, we'll probably look into.
Okay. So I noticed on your website you have a subscription option. Are you seeing this as you're selling direct to consumers? Or are you still thinking that you need a channel for connecting with wherever store owners or wherever bar owners that you're trying to get more bulk supply? Because those seem like very different strategies I would use.
Mm-hmm. I think you're spot on there too. So almost all brands have a direct to consumer presence. And I think it's important for us to have a website, especially our approach is to take an omni-channel approach that has the direct to consumer element, but really focuses on the Texas market first. We want to become winners in our backyard before we look to expand nationally. And so it's nice to have the direct to consumer so that your family and friends that's over in Maryland or Chicago can buy your product and try it. But our real focus is going to be on becoming leaders in our own backyard. And so there are specific retailers that we are wanting to get into in Texas. So if we can get into like the central markets, the HEBs, the Whole Foods of the world, that's where I'm really focused on. And so then you end up oftentimes developing the relationship with the retailer and then having to go through a distributor to get your product on the shelves there. And then from the wholesale perspective, there's also certain websites that work more with like some of the more independent companies. So like Fair and Air Goods will probably also list our product on. But the primary focus is going to be getting the product into stores on the shelves so that people can see your product in person.
So you're kind of starting local first and expanding out. Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah. And as far as I know, you started this company on your own, correct? Or do you have a partner?
So I am the primary partner here. I do have an advisor, Katie, whose background is in consumer products. She spent 4 years working at Pepsi. She went to Stanford at the same time I was at Kellogg, and she now works at Pinterest in consumer advertising sales. But she's been great to work with. I kind of bounce ideas off of her. And I think if we get to the point where Spacers is making a ton of money and we're growing really quickly, she would be interested in joining full time. But right now, we're not making enough money to scale. We've got to get that product first.
And were you ever thinking about launching it like with another founder, co-founders, or like, I don't know. I'm curious that process, because I started Preacher with, my sister. We do it together, and like, I think we've found that like we're thinking about maybe bringing on some other people, just kind of make it more of like a team and things like that. But curious how it was with you. Like, were you ever like, obviously you went to business school and worked at Bain. You have no shortage of connections who have a lot of business experience, smart people. But what were you thinking about when you launched Spacers?
Yeah, I was ready to take this thing full time, and so that's what I've done. Working with Katie, she's been great. I think I would love to have maybe not a co-founder, but somebody else join me full time once it makes sense to do that. I really like working with teams. That's the inner consultant in me. Like it's all team-based stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's been totally fine for me to be running it right now, but I think as we continue to scale, it'll be important to have a partner that's kind of an equal with me in growing this.
Yes. No, that makes sense.
So we're getting near the end here. I'm curious, do you have any advice for people who also maybe find themselves with an idea that they want to try? It could even be like things you would do differently, but just any sort of advice or suggestions there?
I say go for it. I think that there's a lot that you can do before you go both feet in. But I think if you really believe in yourself and you really believe in your idea, you'll only live like this life once. And so I think do it, just do it. It's scary, but if you truly believe in yourself and you're willing to bet on yourself, I think there is nothing you can be more proud of than knowing that you had an idea and made it happen. I think it's something so many people are afraid to actually do. But you're just going to continue to learn. And I think that's what life is all about, is like continuous learning, challenging yourself, not playing it safe. And so I don't know if that's great advice, but that would be my advice. Just get out there and do it and challenge yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's a great question to end it on. So I guess for people who are listening, where can they find Spacers, and is there a way they can, it sounds like the product's still being manufactured, but is there a way they can get on like a waiting list or anything like that? Like, what's the best way to check out Spacers?
Yeah, please check us out. You can go to our website at www.drinkspacers.com. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at drinkspacers. The product will be ready to go in a month, but you can pre-order the product right now, and we've got merchandise available. So if anybody wants some of this cool Spacers merch, we'd be happy to send you some.
Yes, and I guess we are audio only, but it is very dope merch. You have a very nice sweater, so definitely check it out. But thank you so much, Kristen. It was fantastic to talk. I know I learned a lot, so it was great. So we really appreciate the time.
Yeah, awesome. It was so nice to meet you, Taylor, and it was great to connect, Stephen. Wish you guys the best of luck with the podcast. I think what you guys are doing is super cool.
Yes, thank you so much, and yeah, we'll definitely have to keep chatting.